Let me take you back, young ones, to the summer of 1943. Picture this, the sun beating down on Sicily, the kind of heat that makes your helmet feel like a pot on a stove, the dust choking your lungs, and the sound. Oh, the sound of artillery never ceasing, echoing through the hills. That was where I first saw General George S. Patton, Jr. in action, not just as a leader, but as a force of nature. Now, Patton was not a man you could easily understand unless you'd lived through battles with him. He believed in toughness above all else. Weakness, hesitation, fear, they were sins in his eyes, and God help you if he thought you showed any of them. I remember the first time he came to visit the field hospitals. He didn't walk like most generals. No, he strode with purpose, a cane in his hand, his eyes sharp, scanning every face. And he expected the same in return. He wanted heroes, men ready to get back on the line, ready to face death without flinching. But war doesn't always give you heroes when you need them. That day, in a small tent that smelled of antiseptic and sweat, Patton met a young soldier. The boy, no older than 20, was trembling, pale, and his uniform barely hung on him. He had no visible wounds, nothing to explain the terror that gripped him. "Sir," the boy said, voice cracking, I can't do it anymore. I can't face the noise, the shooting. I just can't." Now, I'll tell you, I've seen many things in my years, but the look on Patton's face, it was something else. Anger, disbelief, a fire that could burn through steel. To him, this wasn't illness, this was cowardice, and in that moment he believed he had to act, not gently, not with understanding, but with force. And so, he struck the young man, across the face, hard. And then came the words, insults, threats, a storm of fury aimed at a boy who couldn't comprehend what had become of him. I remember thinking even then that this would haunt Patton. The man was a genius on the battlefield, yes, but that moment, that was a shadow that would follow him and all of us for the rest of the war. Because what happened next, what happened next reached far beyond that hospital tent. The story of Patton and that young soldier would ripple all the way up the chain of command to the highest offices of the Allied forces, and it would force men to confront a truth that even in war was hard to swallow. Courage is not always visible, and bravery is not always measured by how loud you scream on the battlefield. Sit back, my friends. This is only the beginning of a story that is as harsh as it is human. In the next chapter, I will tell you what came after, how Patton's actions shook the soldiers, the army, and even the man himself, and why even the greatest generals must sometimes face the consequences of their own fury. So, now that first strike, that moment in the hospital, seemed at the time like a private matter, something that belonged only to Patton and that young soldier. But word travels fast in war, my friends, faster than bullets sometimes, and it wasn't long before the whispers reached the ears of the highest commanders. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, was not a man to ignore such matters. He was calm, steady, and he understood the fragility of morale in a war where men fought not only bullets, but fear itself. When Eisenhower heard what Patton had done, he didn't shout, didn't react with fury like Patton might have expected. No, he measured every word, weighed every possible outcome, and he knew that if this incident got out, it could destroy the reputation of the U.S. Army, and more importantly, damage the trust of the soldiers who were already terrified of what lay ahead in Europe. So, orders went out, Patton was summoned, and the old, proud, fiery general, he who had never admitted fault in his life, was forced to explain himself. I was there, standing in the shadows as Patton prepared to face the music, and let me tell you, it was a sight. He didn't bow his head, not completely. He had too much pride for that. But he swallowed his temper, and for the first time he had to use words to calm a situation he normally would have handled with fists or threats. He wrote letters of apology. He visited hospitals again, but this time with gentler words, trying to show respect where he had shown none. The army wanted a show of humility, and Patton gave it, though it was painful to watch him do so. Yet the soldiers had seen everything. Many of them admired Patton's brilliance and courage, but they also saw his temper, his ruthlessness. Some whispered that he had gone too far. Others thought, in his harsh way, he was trying to make them tougher. But here's the truth, and listen carefully. Courage is not simple. It is not uniform. What one man sees as bravery, another sees as terror. And Patton, he was a man of extremes. He demanded heroism from those who were just trying to survive, and in doing so, he reminded everyone that war doesn't forgive weakness, whether real or imagined. And so the story grew. From that hospital in Sicily, the tale of the young soldier slapped by the general spread through the ranks and all the way to the press. Families back home would eventually hear of it. Public opinion, always a wild force even in wartime, began to stir. The newspapers painted Patton as a hero, a genius, but also as a man dangerously unrestrained. And in the quiet of the night, Patton himself had to reckon with something he rarely admitted. Sometimes the enemy is not the soldier across the battlefield, but the rage within yourself. But we are not done yet, my friends. There is more to this story. For in war, consequences are rarely simple, and even the mightiest generals must face trials that cannot be won with strategy alone. In the next chapter, I will tell you what happened when Patton returned to the front, how his reputation hung in the balance, and how a single moment of anger became a lesson for the ages about leadership, humanity, and the harsh reality of war. Now, my friends, this is where the story truly becomes a lesson, not just in war, but in life. After the hospitals, after the apologies, after the letters that Patton had to write under Eisenhower's orders, the general returned to the battlefield. The war did not pause for humility, did it? No, Sicily was still a land of chaos, smoke, and fear, and Patton had to lead men who had now seen him at his most violent and his most contrite. The soldiers watched him closely. Some admired him still for his brilliance. He moved troops with almost supernatural precision, struck blows that astounded even the Germans, but others, quietly, feared him. They remembered the slap, the fury, the wrath of a man who demanded courage without understanding the weight of terror. And here's the paradox. Despite the scandal, despite the tension, Patton's army fought harder, sometimes inspired by fear, sometimes by admiration, always aware that they were following a man who could lead them to victory or push them beyond the limits of endurance. Meanwhile, back in Washington and London, Eisenhower and the other commanders debated Patton's fate. He was a genius, yes, a brilliant strategist, but could a man so quick to anger be trusted with more lives, with bigger battles? The answer, reluctantly, was yes, but with caution. Patton was allowed to continue commanding, but under scrutiny, and with the knowledge that one wrong move could end his career, or worse, damage the Allied effort. And so the story of the hospital incident became a legend, not just for the act itself, but for what it revealed about the nature of leadership in war. Patton taught us that courage is messy, that discipline can become cruelty if not tempered with understanding, and that even the greatest minds are haunted by their flaws. The young soldier who had been slapped, we never forgot him either. He was a symbol of the human cost of war, of the invisible wounds that bullets cannot touch. And though history remembers Patton as a brilliant general, it also remembers this story, whispering a caution to all who would command men in battle. Power demands wisdom, and fury can destroy as easily as victory can inspire. So, my friends, as you sit there listening to me now, remember this. The battlefield is not only fought with weapons and strategy, it is fought with patience, with understanding, with humanity. And sometimes the greatest victories are not those won on the sand or the hilltops, but the ones we win over our own tempers, our own judgments, and our own failures. That, my friends, is the story of Patton in Sicily, the slap heard around the hospitals, the fury that shook the army, and the lesson that even in war we must never forget the human heart.